thanks to all of you for coming, and a special thanks to the women who came today to talk to us, and Cathy Bellon for moderating, Kathleen Wickelman for hosting us, and once again for all the faculty, staff, and all of you who came. I think we're all excited about the program. I was just talking to a few of our guests today, and it's interesting, some of the stories. I've only been here 33 years, so there's a lot more that happened before I got here. Cathy Bellon on the end is, she and her husband are retired from commercial fishing and own the Potlatch Bar. And I was telling her when I first got here, I had, sometimes I couldn't get enough students in an anthropology class, so I had one of my special students who I could find him at the Potlatch. And I'd go, and Bill Jensen and I'd ask, would you please take my class? And he generally would. And he really added a lot to the class. Yeah. And we have Ernestine Henderson. She's a retired magistrate and has
marriage commissioner.
Clerk of court. And you've performed many weddings.
Yes.
Wow.
We're hoping that Elinore Jacobsen will be here. She's not here quite yet. And Alaire Stanton, many of you know, served 9 years on the school board, 5 years as president. Is that correct? Right. And 5 years on the city council, 6 years as city mayor, and director of the Pioneer Home. Wow. So we have some very accomplished women today, and Cathy Bellon will be our moderator.
Yes.
And just a note, next month I'm going to do 25 years of archaeology. not, it won't take 25.
Okay, well, in celebration of Women's History Month, Kathleen and I were brainstorming about what we would like to do as a special event, and as things came around and the conversation continued, and then running into Cathy Bellon at the grocery store, which is where we all gather.
My apologies. I had a mammogram this morning. And I was delayed there, and so I'm delayed here. But
We won't describe how you were hung up.
Thank you.
So, the conversation started with Kathleen and I about all these stories. I mean, I know my mom came up in January of '53. She, Sheila's saying louder.
Yes.
She's on the deck of the Denali, and she's looking at all the snow on the dock, and she left graduate school for a social worker job in the territory, and she thought, what have I done? And then she met my dad in a police car, and everything was fine after that. So I'm going to start today's conversation, and this is just a very informal conversation. And I'll start with Mrs. Bellon, and because even though I'm of a certain age, she's still Mrs. Bellon, because that's how it is. To talk about how you got here and your first impressions and what brought you.
Well, my husband came first in '54, and he come up here to make money for about 2 years, and then he's gonna go back south and spend the money. But he bought a boat, and he got a job on the police department, and he really liked that job. And I don't know, one boat called for another, bigger and bigger, and then we had a new chief come to town, and he really liked Chuck, and he said, I want to send you to FBI school in Washington, D.C. So we did, and we stayed here. I liked Ketchikan. I liked it when I first got here. I flew up on Pan American Airways, and we landed over there. And in Seattle, like I say, we sat on the tarmac for a half hour, warming up both 4 engines, one at a time, warm up, and then we took off, and it took us quite a while to finally take off. I think about 4 hours to fly. Long time. And a little girl was sitting next to me. She was about 6 or 7. She was by herself. And she was so happy and looking out the window, and I'm crying. I'm scared. I've never been on an airplane before. Oh, God. And then, I don't know, we just stayed. And I can remember where the Moose Club was. It used to be between the Mary Frances, there was no Dock Street. It didn't come all the way through. And the Moose Club was between the Mary Frances and, gosh, what's Federal Market? I think it would be. That's a long time. And, yeah, a long, long time. And all three of my kids were born at Ketchikan General. Of course, that's gone now. Where were you born, Kathy?
The old hospital.
And then there was no Jefferson Street. You had to go up Madison Street. And the high school, of course, was on 4th Avenue, and you couldn't go all the way on 4th Avenue. That was blocked off. There's kind of a creek there, and Bonnie King lived on the corner. And to get to our place where we live now, Chuck told the city engineer, he said, you better punch a road through there. He says, I'm building a house on the corner. And they did. Put a road in there, and that's how it was like that. And there was 4 lots. We bought the lots from Louis Glass. And put our roots in. Of course, they've been here a long time now. I've been here since 55. I came in January 55, and there was, I don't think there was any snow, which I was real disappointed. I thought we were going to have an igloo or something, you know. And a lot of you people were born here, but I was a transplant from Chehalis. So that's about it.
Ernestine, you want to tell
I
us?
really don't know where to start.
She married my daughter. She doesn't remember that.
Well, there
Okay,
were
if I could remember all the weddings I
Sons of
performed,
Norway.
I'd be better than 1,000. But my husband came up to work. His mother owned June's Cafe. And he came up to work. He had just finished realty school and Barber College. He's going to come up and make money just like everyone else. Come back, buy the homes, fix them up, and sell them. Well, that didn't quite work because he was here about 3 months. He said, this is not going to work. You guys have to come up. So when school was out, Ramon was in school, my oldest son. So when school was out, we came up and was going to spend the summer. Well, that didn't work. We didn't move back until 3 years later. He went up to Sitka to work for his grandmother. And she had what they called at that time, I guess they still do, was a scow. Well, the scow sunk. So she lost everything. So he came back to Ketchikan and he started working construction. Well, he got fired a couple of times because it was such a culture shock for all of us. And I'd never seen him in a pair of jeans. He always had his slacks on. When I saw him in jeans, I thought, oh, wow, look at you. But he wasn't used to that type of work, so he got fired on a couple of jobs, and he finally got the hang of it. So I helped my mother-in-law in the restaurant for a while, but that didn't work out too long because I wasn't very good at waiting tables. So I went to work for Gordon Zervitz down at the Stedman Hotel. That was very, very exciting because I got to meet a lot of people. I worked the desk there. I was desk clerk. And we would arrange for concerts up to the high school. And that was exciting. I got to work up there. And finally, my husband said, no more work. You can't work anymore. So I gave Gordon Zervitz about 3 months, 2 weeks notice, and he would never hire anyone. So finally I just didn't show up for work because he didn't want me to quit. And I was enjoying it, but my husband absolutely said, no, you can't do that anymore. So that was a very exciting time for me. And then the Presbyterian Church we lived upstairs over Mother June's restaurant. And so finally we moved out and got our own place in Barney Way. And that was quite exciting. Then they had a fire and a lot of the homes burned there in that corner there. So Of course, ours didn't, but the two houses right next door to us burned. And let's see, what did I do after that?
Where's Barney Way?
It was there in the area where the barber shop was. Remember where the barber shop was? On the corner there. It was right on Stedman there.
Stedman.
And Barney Way was right up
That
next to
little-
the library.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that little street up there.
So did you fly or take a boat here?
We flew up on Pan Am.
Mhm.
And when we docked, we had to change planes, at Annette Island.
Mhm.
But I didn't think anything about it. I was very adventurous. I looked out and saw, oh, what is this, and I just fit right in. And every day, I had 3 kids at the time. And then I had 2 here. But we would go out every day. It would be raining and storming. And I remember buying a cover for the stroller. And I have not seen any since. It was like we wear raincoats, well, this was for a stroller. I used to go out in the rain all the time and take the kids, and we thought nothing about it. Absolutely, I loved the rain. And so I would meet people. Then I started getting active with politically. And then I met Doris Volsky, and I went to work for the court system. And this is really something. It was only 2 or 3 of us. Doris and myself, I think, started out working. And the attorneys and judges would have a little social on Fridays downstairs at the Mary Frances Hotel. So they would invite the clerks. So Doris, we went down. And my first time going, I thought it was open for everyone. Walked in there. There was no ladies, all men, judges and attorneys. And I looked and I was just shocked. And so I was looking for some place to sit. And I couldn't find any place. And then there was one empty seat. And I sat down immediately. And I sat on an ashtray that was lit. And so I jumped up and Judge Gucker said, well, whatever turns you on. Oh, there was some exciting times. I have so many memories.
Okay. Elinore, you came up in.
Well, I came up, first of all, I was born in northern Wisconsin, and I did my nursing education, my basic nursing education, in the city of Chicago. And I stayed there for a while and worked in surgery. And then because I had gone to a 3-year school in nursing, I wanted to get my degree. And so I transferred down to the University of Illinois. And from there, it sort of goes, my mother always said I had sand in my shoes because I kept moving from place to place to place. And I eventually ended up in San Francisco, and my youngest sister married a young man that we were reared in the same community in northern Wisconsin. And that was Del Richardson, and he was a guide, and he hauled all the logs for their house from the Unic River, and he built the house himself and did all the caulking, made his own cement, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I came up, but Del he also took people from Germany on bear hunting trips, and he had a bear hunting trip, and that was when my first husband, Bob Gore, met me. Again, I went to Annette, and I thought, well, and then it's like, well, you get on the plane, and then you get over to Ketchikan, and anyway, we had 3 daughters, Mary, Jennifer, and Ann, and Mary works in Anchorage, Ann lives in Anchorage and works in Anchorage, and Jennifer is in Seattle. And I thought I was better prepared, but my son-in-law, Pat Dwyer, was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. And they told him he had a 2 to a 5 year span, and he lived for 8 years. But probably shouldn't have included that. But anyway,
That explains where Jennifer was yesterday, right? And her work now.
right, right. And but anyway, I'm kind of hung up on Pat.
Well,
Well,
you
and-
let me go ahead, and then you can butt in later.
Well, I was going to say Jennifer was in Washington, D.C. That's where she is right now.
Right.
Because she's on a board for
Yeah.
an ALS Foundation. Is that?
Yes, she's an extremely strong advocate for Lou Gehrig's disease.
And so she was at the vice president's house last night, where we were. Yes.
But
Yeah.
you know, she really has raised awareness in this what she calls the cruel disease.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm in the same house that I've been for over 50 years. And I thought at one time, because with Mary and Ann living up in Anchorage, that I would move to Anchorage. Bev Zog is a friend of mine, and her daughter Linda is a realtor in Anchorage. And I said, I want to look at 5 houses, and I want to just show me 5, and I will make a decision. But you know, in the back of my mind, I thought, you really want to move to Anchorage? And I looked at all 5 houses and bid adieu to Linda Zog, and here I am in Ketchikan in the same house that I've been in for, you know, over 50 years.
I had to say, I told Sheila, I said, Sheila, call and see, because we were worried about you.
Yeah.
And we both said, well, we know the number because it's been the same number, and we've called your house 17,000 times, probably over our lifetime. So it's working for us.
Well, the answering machine is in the kitchen, and there's a wall between the kitchen and the dining room, and another entryway to the front door, and the
We know.
living room was here. And so I didn't hear. I didn't hear the answering machine. I didn't hear it ring. I didn't pay any attention to the answering machine.
You're hearing that, all.
Like the rest of it.
Oh boy, yeah.
Okay, so
Thank
Alaire, you got here when?
Well, I almost put on my hat that I've saved for almost 60 years, but I couldn't find anything to wear with it. So I had to settle for the pearls, because when ladies went out in the 50s, at lunchtime especially, they wore pearls. So I want you to know I'm appropriately dressed, even though I've got slacks on. It'll be 60 years next month, on the 13th of April, that I flew into Annette Island, and that my husband and I arrived from Annette over to the Ellis Airlines dock, and we were met by 2 of his colleagues from the technical department at the brand new pulp mill. It wasn't running yet, but they were going to get it started. And Lloyd Nault and Don Groves met us on the dock, and it was snowing. And we had left Seattle on a beautiful spring day, and it was snowing. So they loaded us into the car with our luggage. We didn't have much because we'd only been married 6-7 months. And we knew we were going to move to Ketchikan, so we didn't buy a lot of stuff. We figured we could buy it when we got here. And that was our second big mistake. We got a ride from Lloyd and Don, and they took us to the Wingren Court by way of the Goat Trail and told us it was the only way to get there. So they gave us an introduction to Ketchikan by driving on all the back roads and going over to the Wingren Court. Now, if you don't know what the Wingren Court is, that's what's presently called the Marine View Apartments. And we tried 4 apartments in the Windgren Court with all the other people from the mill who couldn't find a house to buy. And we didn't really like any of them, so we moved around quite a lot. And we lived in an apartment over what used to be Hometown Furnishings, Don King's building on Tongass. And eventually we decided we'd move out to the country, so we rented a little house from Bob Race, and we were happier there. But I think that the introduction to Ketchikan was really a good one because of the camaraderie and the friendship of the other pulp mill wives. Our husbands generally were working 24-hour days or being called out in the middle of the night and trying to get the mill going, and the technical department was pretty busy at that time. And we spent a lot of time by ourselves with children and that sort of thing, and we were mostly all in the Windgren Court. I don't know if you remember, well, some of you certainly do remember that we didn't have a decent high school until about that time. They were constructing the first high school on the lot on 4th Avenue. We didn't have a junior high. We had no swimming pools. We had hardly anything else in the way of activities for young people. They say we had no junior high. We had no TV, by the way. It was much later when we started getting canned films on the televisions. If you had a television, you could get a canned film from the company that a couple of gentlemen started here in town. But we didn't have any broadcast TV. And it was quite a while before people on North Tongass got a microwave signal from Terrace that was the first live TV that arrived here. I can't remember the dates on that. I was 18, by the way, a newlywed. I was several months pregnant with my first child, and it was a rough first year. I felt very much the loneliness from being away from my mother, but people like Shirley Nault and Marilyn Groves tried to substitute for the lack there, and I finally got used to it. Let's see. During the first summer, there was hardly any movement back and forth between the West End and downtown because they were reconstructing Water Street. And so we had all this torn up street. And when I had to go to the doctor for my appointments because I was pregnant, I had to walk from basically the Lutheran church down to the NBA building. And that was a very cumbersome way to get downtown because often it was a couple of planks alongside the buildings. So it was kind of a frontier experience for that first summer. How far do you want to go into my life?
Wow, we are taking notes.
Well, after we got through moving around in town, we discovered that there was property available out in North Tongass. It was available for what they called home sites. And we found a great place on Cranberry Road with a wonderful view. And we purchased that property, and for the next several years, Roland built most of the house himself. He had some helpers once in a while for people who did the foundation with him and that kind of thing, but basically he built the house by himself. And it's a great house. And if you want to see what it looks like, make an appointment with Nancy Elkins, because she lives there now. We have built 3 houses that we've lived in. We're in the 3rd one now, and it's kind of fun to design and build your own house, and that's what my husband has done in his spare time. One of the things that struck me about the 60s was that when my kids started going to school at Houtling, which was a brand new school at that time, they needed people to be active in the PTA. And so I volunteered to be an officer in the PTA at Houtling. Dolores Hout was the president, and I wound up as treasurer. And we had some good times along with some struggles. The principal at Houtling at that time was C.L. Montgomery. I'm sure lots of you remember him. That was the start of my volunteer career. And I've been volunteering ever since, and I'm still volunteering. But some of it was more exciting than others. But in the 60s, it was mainly around the schools. We needed new schools. We needed a new junior high. We needed activities for kids. Cathy, I think you were involved in things like raising money for a swimming pool, like some of your brothers and sisters were. Yeah. And it was a pretty exciting time in the 60s around here. Do we have later times to talk?
We do.
Okay.
I do want to touch on, employment opportunities, jobs. And you mentioned your husband said, "Okay, no more work." I'm thinking, this is back in the day. I think where you had to have your husband's permission to be able to charge things, to be able to.
We didn't go quite that far.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay. But Mrs. Bellon, if you would kind of talk about
Well, you talk
work
about-
and women's work.
Well, I
in
didn't work.
that era.
I
You didn't work.
No.
Oh, and my mom didn't work either.
I know. I stayed
No,
home.
she didn't.
But you talking about
That
credit
was-
cards and
But
stuff.
what was expected of you?
We brought a boat up from Tacoma, and we got to Canada somewhere, and we were running out of money. My mom was with us, and a guy by the name of Johnny Orlando, and we didn't have any money. We didn't think, and Chuck says, I think we better apply for a credit card when we get home. We never had one. They were kind of new, I think. And that was in, gosh, I don't know. We had so many boats. A lot of boats. But, you talk about that. But I never worked. I wanted to stay home with my kids. And Chuck did all right, so I didn't have to work. And he said, stick with me and we'll go places. Never dreamed it'd be the Potlatch Bar. He came home one time and he said, I'd like to buy that place if I ever retire. He said, I take a lot of calls down there. And he said, it's a pretty good business. Well, the lady that
So who owned it? Who did you buy
well,
it from?
hell, what was her name? I'll get it later. But she died, and she left it to Bob Ziegler.
That's right.
Josephine Hill. Is it Josephine Hill?
Josephine Hill, yeah. And I didn't know her, And Bob called us, he called Chuck, and I remember we go up to his office, he said, I understand you want to buy a bar. Chuck said, yeah, I do, and I thought, oh, God. I don't want to buy. I was raised around him, and I didn't like him, and I wasn't a drinker, and Chuck wasn't either, to tell you the truth. He took a lot of calls. In fact, we had a meeting one time in the Stedman Hotel after a court thing, and they had this big dining room at the Stedman Hotel. And Walt was there, her dad, and his new wife, and I didn't know her. But Walt was so funny. He got up and he said, if Sergeant Bradshaw will play the piano, Walt said, I'll sing.
Susan, we have to go run an errand.
And I didn't know who Walt was. And Sergeant Bradshaw didn't stand up to play. And Walt said, well, I don't know how to sing either. So he said, he was so funny, he really was. But I know Chuck took a lot of calls. And one of them was going down Madison Street in the snow when the Arctic Bar was going in the creek.
Now, what caused that? Just too
Rain,
many
I guess.
revelers?
I don't know, but he came home after the bar went in the creek. He came home and he said, there was a guy sitting in there. He wouldn't get up off of the stool. He had a drink. He wanted to finish his drink. I got a lot of stories I could tell.
Because Chuck was he in the the dad was a deputy marshal for the territory,
He was a marshal.
and then
Your dad was a
oh,
marshal
okay,
when we first came here.
and then went into the troopers when we became a state. So was Chuck
right, for a while.
in the marshal service or
Chuck
in
was
the?
nothing. He worked at the pulp mill for a while in the bleach department or whatever it was. And he didn't like that, and he long short, and then somebody come and said, do you afraid of getting shot? Well, yeah. Well, we need somebody to help us close down a creek, one of the places on the creek. And if you do that, then you can get a job on the police department. He never dreamed he'd be that, So he went, helped him close down the place. and he got his job, and he was on the city police all the time.
So what year was that he
Oh,
went on
gosh,
that one call? Do you remember?
probably 54. I hadn't come here yet. And it was still a state, you know, and everything went through the commissioner, O.M. Lean. And then after we became a state, when we went to Washington, D.C., it was still a territory. In fact, when I flew there, he went first. And the kids and I flew all night to Washington, D.C. It took a long time. And when I got there, this lady that we rented the house from her apartment, she thought I was an Eskimo, would be an Eskimo. She was real surprised when I was blonde. Yeah. But, and then that's when he met your dad, and him and Chuck were good friends, a long time.
So yeah, not everything could be told.
I know.
So Ernestine, tell us about work life for women in Ketchikan.
With
50s
me,
and
I had no
60s.
problem. I was sort of in demand. Everybody wanted me to work for them because I worked for the Stanton Hotel as desk clerk, and then I quit there. And Jeanette Edwards looked me up and found me, wanted me to come work for Revenue Motor Vehicle. And I went to work there, and I quit. I think I went south on vacation and came back. She wanted me back. And then their opening came up at the court system. That sounded more interesting to me because I did not like cars. I could not tell one car from the other. So I quit and I went to work for the court system. It was really a culture shock when I first came here, and my husband would give me a trip out about every 3 months. So, and I would
That
stay
was
for
really unusual,
Yeah, really.
right? Because it was really expensive
Yeah.
to travel.
Right, but I guess he was doing okay in his employment after he got used to wearing jeans. But I went to work. I quit there and I went to work for the state. I've had so many jobs. I went to work for Revenue, the court system, state troopers, back to the court system several times. But I was sort of, if you had any kind of education and was able to work and a good personality, it was not hard for me to find a job. And that worked out really well for me. But what I'd like to focus on the schools. I think it was Elinore found my daughter. She had a curvature of the spine. That was Makisha. And I took us out to our specialist, and she had scoliosis. So he built our brace for her and corrected her spine. But he was just amazed at how this was found. And he was very impressed with, I told him it was found through the school, because you would come to the school. Didn't you check the kids? I just don't remember really exactly how it went down. But she did, she wore that. And I always felt that our schools were very good here compared to the ones in LA at the time. So that was a plus for us. And the kids turned out to be pretty good kids. Anything else you want to ask, you just have to ask me. I'll keep going on and on.
We'll talk about work, and then we'll come back around and talk about social clubs. So.
I, am a past president of the local Pioneer Auxiliary, and I really, enjoyed that. I'm sitting here and holding my notes, and would you believe I went to Toastmasters for a couple of years, and I had to tell you that because you were supposed to be able to stand up and speak extemporaneously about your given subject. You tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them, and then you sit down. So here I am with my notes. No notes, no notes. At that time.
So you went into public health as a school
did.
nurse, as a
I did. And I worked, initially I worked at the old health center, which was across from the Legion dugout downtown. And the old hospital was, across the street. And I really enjoyed that work. And had occasion, I worked with some of the public health doctors, and we took planes over to the West Coast to see individuals that didn't have the opportunity or the financial wherewithal in order to come to town. So I would sort of screen the patients and get a general, and then categorize them as to, whether it was Tom Conley or there were two other public health physicians, if not. But that was really, really an interesting experience, and something that I think the state of Alaska did and should have done for those individuals that had no access to health care.
okay, work.
Work. Well, I didn't really go to work until my kids were well into school. I didn't have any problem getting a job. I usually worked for an accountant as some sort of helper or bookkeeper or whatever. I didn't have a degree, but I worked for a couple of accountants before I got full-time work, and that was much, much later on in the 70s and 80s, where I found my satisfaction was in volunteering, like I said. And I think that being a full-time mom is exciting, and we eventually had 4 children, and that took a lot of time. You're going to go into entertainment and that sort of thing. Part of the things that kept us sane in those days was an occasional bridge club over lunch, or a bowling league. We had a bowling league. Most of the wives whose husbands worked at the mill were on a team for the Pulp Mill Wives bowling team. And we did the bowling down at the Elks Club, which is now the building that First City Players is taking over. And that was our entertainment. Most of us were stay-at-home moms for a number of years. And it was much, much later. And at that time, there wasn't a real big problem getting a job when you had any skills at all.
Okay. So I understand, before the era of television, that Ketchikan was rollicking with social clubs. There was always something to do, pretty much maybe like now, there's always something to do in town, but everything was somehow connected. I call them the animal clubs. There was Elks and the Moose. I have the best memories of the Elks Club. So, Elks, the Moose clubs, the Lions clubs, they were all really socially active. So
I don't know where the Moose Club moved to after from Mary Frances that was there, between the Mary Frances and Federal Apartments. Where'd the Moose Club go?
it's a conversation. Where'd the Moose Club go?
Water Street.
There's one. Isn't it on Creek Street now? Oh, it was on Water Street.
It was on Water Street, but now it's on.
The Eagles is on Creek Street.
Well, it's actually on Tongass when it first came,
It's where
and
the
then
old
Water
Easter
Street.
seals used to be.
Yeah.
Oh, it's where the old Easter Seals used to be, across from
I know
where
where it is now.
KTB and Norby's building. It isn't there either.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
No,
Wasn't it by the tunnel there where, remember the Pollyanna Bakery was upstairs? Upstairs.
Pollyanna Bakery, cinnamon bread.
That corner of Grant and
Gail is
Front.
saying it was the Eagles at that time.
It was the Eagles, and then the Eagles, when they moved to Creek Street, sold it to the Masonic Lodge.
oh, that was the Eagles.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh.
on the corner.
The Moose moved
Yeah.
from Barney Way out to Tongass Avenue, one of the old cannery can company buildings. which is now the Waterfront Restaurant.
Oh,
Yeah.
They were there for many years.
A lot of those clubs had a color line too. That they were white only, quite a few of them. I knew some Native women who were married to white guys and they were not allowed to join the clubs
that was in the 50s?
in the 50s.
Wow.
It was very strange for me coming up here.
That held until the civil rights legislation, federal civil rights legislation in the 60s.
My first Matthew took him into the Elks, and I belonged to the Emblem Club, but I was joining. I joined
Never
every
saw
day.
any brown
Beta
people
Sigma
in the
Phi,
stores.
American Legion Auxiliary, BFW Auxiliary.
Oh, they could shop.
What
They
else
weren't
did I
working
belong to?
there.
League of Women
Who
Voters.
did you work for?
American
You worked for the
Cancer
Forest Service,
Society.
I worked
didn't
for
you?
the Forest Service, right. I also was teaching, when I came up, I did some substitute teaching until my job opened up because the feds move very slowly. And it was a couple months before all the paperwork was done. Is it okay if I speak up?
Sure, we're having a conversation.
I feel
Okay.
lazy for not having a job.
I came here in 1955. I was raised in California, in Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Diversity was the way of life. I was probably the only multiracial person on the island when I arrived here. And
You just didn't.
there was a
socialize.
divide. And there's never a divide that's pretty. It was pretty ugly in some cases. I also was disappointed going to the grocery stores because I was raised on an Asian diet. My parents would send me Chinese sausage and different kinds of condiments so I could do my own cooking. And I recall once when I was in the hospital, my life was saved by Pete Figueroa and the other, and Benny, both of whom would make sure that I got steamed rice every day. But in the 50s, the divide was very clear. I mean, you didn't see the mix. And so it was very strange coming from a state where the mix was just as natural as breathing.
Interestingly enough, there was also a divide between the mill people and the old timers.
Oh, right, we were resented.
We felt it every day. People didn't want to accept the mill people.
That's right.
And there were a lot of old timers in the town, including the merchants, who never really accepted the mill people until 1965, when the mill workers went on strike and the money dried up at the merchants. And then they realized what an impact the mill workers had on this
Oh,
town.
yes, we came
It
up
was
with the
very
mill.
obvious, and I agree with you, Jerry.
And going to a store, if there were a few people there, not being shy, I would speak up and say, "Excuse me, I was here first." And then grudgingly, I would be waited upon. But not with any good cheer, if you will.
No, I never experienced any discrimination when I came here. I was asked when I belonged to the League of Women Voters if I felt any discrimination. I said, I should be asking you because they're not going to let me know. But I did not. That's one thing I did not experience in the whole time. That later, years, I would say more now than ever. Because before I didn't have that problem. I was not in demand for a job.
And you said you were a joiner, so all the social clubs, is that what you did in the evening? People don't, now people go home and they get in front of, they go from one screen at work to another screen at home, right?
I volunteered for everything. And finally my husband told me, I'm not joining any more clubs. Just so you can socialize. But I did. I think I started off politically And then I went to our Beta Sigma Phi. I was asked to join that, and the American Legion Auxiliary, VFW Auxiliary, League of Women Voters, I did mention that. The American Cancer Society, I was on the board of directors for that, and I was on the board of directors for the League of Women Voters too, and that's when I met Joe Carroll, and we all were very, oh yeah, and
Let me interject one more time with, I did have a great experience with Beta Sigma Phi, a group of women. We founded the museum, which was really exciting because there was nothing there, and we decided that we had a lot of people in Ketchikan who probably had wonderful artifacts up in the attic, and I went to Heckman's and got some cases from them that were donated. I always got pushed out because I was never shy. I would ask for things, I would ask for money, it didn't matter. People would cringe when they saw me coming. What do you want now?
That might be its own Ask UAS, how our museum started.
They were very accommodating though, once we got it started. But Alaire is right, we were not welcome, you know.
The
and
newcomers, anybody new.
It was so evident, but there were some very nice things. I can recall when I was with the Forest Service, a couple new employees came up, dead broke. They went to Gaffney's. He outfitted both of them on a handshake. Where else would that happen? They were so stunned because they had talked to the owner and told them their circumstance. Just don't worry about it. See me when you get your first paycheck.
Okay, so social clubs? Animal, elks, any of that?
Well, actually, when the children were small, I didn't belong to any social club because I felt my first responsibility was to, kind of getting them oriented to life. But it was only in later years. But to go back to the discrimination thing, I was at a Pioneer Auxiliary meeting just recently, and Marilyn Stack was giving her personal history of living up in Loring and moving to Ketchikan and so forth. And she said that she very definitely was discriminated against because of her color, because that was the way it was.
Social clubs?
Social clubs.
What you do for fun?
Well, I mentioned the Hope Mill Women's Bowling team. We did a lot of bowling. Neither my husband nor I were really joiners much. Of course, he was pretty busy building his house and our house, and so that took a lot of his spare time, and we just never got around to joining any clubs particularly. We were very active in the church, and I think that became our social activity. It became the core of our friends. We volunteered quite a lot of time. We both taught Sunday school. We did other things around the church, and that continues to this day.
I remember there always being a rivalry between the numbers of bars and the
number of churches.
Of churches.
Yeah, it used to be 40 and 40, I think.
40?
Yeah, but I don't know what it is now. I haven't counted.
Well-balanced
Right.
town,
So
apparently.
between raising 4 children and keeping track of their school activities and going to every concert and play and everything else, we kept pretty busy. We didn't have a lot of time to join, but I can't say that we were bored at all.
Well, it's creeping up to 1, and I have to hear about the flashlight bomb. And I wonder if there's any other little story, any one little story you thought, oh, I just need to put this out on the table before this story's lost. You have a story?
no, I was thinking about the flashlight bomb. I had forgotten about it.
Okay, well, this is
I don't remember.
this is
really.
Cathy Bellon. Who,
Well, I made
Yeah.
a mistake and mentioned it to Kathy.
no, everything happens produce department. I heard it all there. So.
Well, I think it was Chuck's last big case before he quit when we bought the Potlatch Bar. But he said he got a call down to Thomas Basin where somebody was, a flashlight went off. He hit the button on the flashlight and blew up in his hands. And it was Harbor Master, one of them. But anyway, Chuck got down there in the corner, and your building, I don't know if you still own it or not, or did at the time, it was a flashlight. He didn't know who'd done it and who'd bought that flashlight or where that came from. And he said, when he got down there, the guy was laying in the street, and the EMTs were just kind of putting these guts back together, really careful. Chuck said, just put him in there and wrap him up and get him to the hospital. And they did that, and then he went and dug little shrapnel out of the wall of that building down there, and he found pieces of flashlight. And he took them to the old Service Electric place, and they sent them away to the lab and stuff, and they found out who bought that flashlight.
Somebody was going after one of the harbor masters, and
It was the
Ron,
harbor master.
the harbor
Yeah,
master.
but they got the wrong one.
Oh.
Yeah, he got the wrong one. That was Max Sailing that they got. He got hurt really bad at his own penny. But,
And didn't you say that they actually sort of packaged him up and then they sent him south?
Yeah, they
That would have
sent him
been
south.
quite the trip at that time.
yeah, they,
For a
I think
medevac.
they probably stopped an airplane. I don't even know. Yeah, I guess there was. No, there wasn't an airport over there. There wasn't a landing over there. They had to go take him out.
Yeah, that would have been a net.
Yeah. And when they got down there, Chuck had to go down and interview the guy, this patient. But anyway, the doctors told him that whoever put this man together to get him down here was Dr. Jim. He said he did a marvelous job. He said if he hadn't have done that, he wouldn't have probably made it.
Dr. Jim?
Jim Wilson.
Oh, Jim Wilson. Yeah.
That was his last case. Man, he was really working on it too. He's going to Sitka and everything else, you know. And Clark Stump was the defense attorney, and Chuck and Clark got along really well. But yeah, he digging out. He said, "I'm digging out little pieces of shrapnel and little pieces of flashlight," and they, by golly, if they didn't figure out where it come from.
One little anecdote that happened after we moved up to North Tongass was that when we started building our house, we found out that there could be no phone service there. So we did a little investigating, and Roland went to the city council. The city, of course, controlled all the utilities at that time, and they weren't really worried about North Tongass. But we found out that they said, well, there's no need for phones out on North Tongass because we've only got 10 people on the waiting list. And of course, there were houses being built all over the place. So Roland and George Farrell took a petition door to door, and they came up with some 100 people who wanted a phone on North Tongass. And finally, the city council decided to put in phone service, and that was the origin of the 247 exchange. So we had phones after that time. But up until then, we were running down the road to the phone on the tree on the end of Pond Reef Road. So it was kind of nice to have your own phone.
So anyone have any questions or a little story? I think we might have to do this again next March. Yeah. I'll make Jell-O. It won't come out pretty, but it'll taste great. So, questions, stories? Really? Okay, Michelle?
I'm delighted in hearing the stories, because what you are talking about are things that I remember from being a kid of the 50s and 60s. And Mrs. Stanton, I think what really struck me was your comment about wearing the hats and the pearls and the gloves. And I just have this vision of my growing up years of the women who were always so well put out, gussied up for events and activities. And that is, I have to comment for beloved Ernestine, because I remember you at the Stedman so vividly, because you were a fashion plate girl. You really have, you just looked smart, smashing all the time. And I remember as a little kid just, wow, this is really interesting.
I remember you at the docks for the weddings.
I arrived in 3-inch heels, a suit, a hat, and gloves. Because that's the way we did it. It was 1955. And
Yeah, we always dressed up.
streets were planked. Got off, and the first thing I did, I caught my heel. And I pitched forward, and happily, there was a guy in back of me who grabbed my coat, or I would have been toothless.
Unfortunately, it wasn't funny at the time.